Today, we are looking at the Forgotten Ones. What we're talking about for today is that after going through the past week or so, the results on the PTR, trying to get a look at how specs are doing in both the raid testing and the PTR for Mythic Plus testing. We looked at the DPS, we looked at the healers, how the specs were doing, what changes were going through some of these specs, if they, for example, were changing hero talents, whether it was in the raid or whether it was in Mythic Plus. We looked at their, their average performances as well in the raid a few days ago. So for today, we are talking about some of the less mentioned specs in this past couple of weeks, because we have heard and we have talked about ourselves about specs like Enhancement Shaman, even Elemental Shaman, the changes to Fire Mage, and the less good changes to Arcane Mage, the rework going the way of Hunter specs. We have looked at some of the meta specs, like for example Devastation Evoker. You might have read a lot about Frost Death Knight, also already very popular specs, even currently very popular specs like Retribution Paladin. However, some of these specs right now that have been doing quite well have also gone a little bit under the radar, like for example Shadow Priest, like Destruction, like Devastation, and like Balanced Druid. They have most definitely not been doing too well, or most definitely not been too meta between Mythic Plus and the raid in this season 1, yet the performance seemed quite promising so far in season 2. We even looked at the PTR for Mythic Plus, and we mentioned that out of the specs we just looked at, Shadow and Destruction and Balance were amongst the most played specs in Mythic Plus as well. Yes, they were below specs like Enhancement and specs like Augmentation, but they were up there. Right below them you had those specs as well. So it would be nice right now to go and take a look at how these specs have been doing. Why are they here? What is changing for these specs? What is this performance based on? Is it a new powerful tier set, new balance tuning coming for the specs, new talents being changed, etc, etc. So the first in line we're looking at is Devastation Evoker. So Devastation Evoker is the least exciting out of the 4 we are mentioning for today. Number 1, Devastation itself is not actually getting that many changes to its talent tree. Not in the talent tree, not in the general tree. They are getting Flame Shaper changed, but nobody plays Flame Shaper as Devastation, and these changes will also not really bring Flame Shaper to be on par with Scale Commander at the moment, at the very least. So really what is changing for Devastation, the main change is Hoarded Power being removed in exchange for Azure Celerity. So that's it. You go from live, which is practically not changing any talents. If you go from live to 11.1, the only thing that changes is now Azure Celerity, the new talent, being over here, which changes nothing about your talents, because you were still going all the time to talent into Scintillation, and to get here you needed to go through here anyways. Besides this, there was the attempt number 75 to make Firestorm more valuable as a talent. Now it does 50% more damage in 40% less time. No, still not very good. You need to give this the Starfall treatment. You need to give this a 0-second cooldown. You need to make this either an Empower spell or an Essence Spender spell, and make it like Starfall, stackable in damage. Otherwise, this will still be a terrible talent. Now, what's happening to Devastation is they are losing their current tier set, which wasn't too bad. A passive 10% Disintegrate damage increase is always welcome, considering the damage of your Disintegrate, as well as the guaranteed Essence Burst whenever you Eternity Surge, and the 5-second cooldown, which wasn't nearly as good because you were cycling Eternity Surge and Fire Breath pretty much one after the other or close together in their cooldown. So getting this one to be 5 seconds shorter wasn't the end of the world. The new tier set is pretty good. It's actually very good. The 2-piece gives you a Shattering Star, a chance, a hasted 2 procs per minute chance to get a Shattering Star at 3 enemies, not just 1, at 50% effectiveness. So the 20% damage increase, it's a 10% damage increase up to 3 enemies. And the 4-piece set bonus is that now when you cast Shattering Star yourself, or you proc it from your jackpot, you also empower your next Empower spell by 20%, stacking up twice, because of course you have 2 Empower spells to use, Fire Breath and Eternity Surge, so it's nice that you get to empower both of them. You get one from the jackpot, one from the hard cast, and then your next 2 Empower spells back to back will be buffed. So it is a pretty cool addition to your damage loop as a Devastation Evoker, without actually changing too much of how you are already playing or the buttons you are already pressing, which as you know from Devastation, are not many. It's not that you press that many things as Devastation Evoker. Now, what are the problems for the spec? Problem number one, unfortunately, is an holistic problem. Difficult word, but it fits here because the problem of Devastation is that this exists. Right? This has been existing, in fact, ever since Season 2 of Dragonflight, and this has been the result since Season 2 of Dragonflight. If there has ever been this, whatever green color this is, in the list of the most played specs, it was Augmentation, not Devastation. You have gotten more representation in the raid. In fact, right now, I think you're even slightly ahead of Augmentation in the representation in the raid. If we go back to the actual, important representation, the release of the raid tier, you had Augmentation ahead of Devastation, but still Devastation wasn't like completely dead as an option. So in the raid you have more chances to be viable. So if your damage will be good, it's still likely you might be picked anyways above Augmentation. But in Mythic Plus you are a lost cause. You're not gonna make it in Mythic Plus over Augmentation. The other problem of Devastation is right now your talents. The talents are pretty bad. Because, right now, as a Devastation Evoker, you kind of don't have that many options to choose, especially in single target. This is AoE only, AoE only, AoE only. This is quite bad, buffing your red spells, considering your red spells don't really do much damage besides Fire Breath itself. And then you have AoE damage and AoE damage. So obviously, in single target, you already start by only having 1, 2, 3 options at the mid to bottom side. So it's not a lot. On top of that, because these two are at the end, which supposedly are meant to be the very powerful ones, you don't even have a follow-up. So even if you were to take one of these two, you couldn't actually go further. So you would have to contest the power of this or the power of this with these two, which are extremely powerful and always taken by a Devastation Evoker, and they will always beat in value one of these two talents. So that's a problem. If you want to stretch this out, then these will be also gone completely, right? Which makes the options in your tree not very varied at the moment. So those are the two main problems right now of Devastation. You're not getting practically any changes from the PTR tuning. Augmentation is still looking quite powerful, and despite your numbers being good, there is still that problem. The problem that you will have to contend your spot with Augmentation, very hard in Mythic Plus, more doable, still difficult, but more doable in the raid. And, talking about that as well, your talent tree is not that great at the moment. You have quite a few dead talents, especially when you move into single target. Now, after them, we have someone in a bit of a better spot, which is Balanced Druid. So Balanced Druid, we have looked already at their performance in Mythic Plus. They were one of the more played specs in Mythic Plus already. Now, technically speaking, it's not that too much is changing for Balance either. Because for Balance, yes, of course, there is the general tree. The general tree is changing a lot, but not really about your spec, your rotation, your talent choices. The only choices you're getting are here, which are very few. Not even your hero talents are being changed. It's just getting the follow-up talent for your solar beam out of the way. Light of the Sun now is moving in the general tree. That's one of the changes for Balance, and doubling the damage of Power of Goldwyn and increasing the free proc chance of Touch of the Cosmos. So the chance to get your free spender when you cast your Rator Starfire has been slightly increased. Now, linking to what we said about Devastation, the situation for Balanced Druid is a little bit better in terms of options. This is a far cry from what we had in previous days when we were complaining about the tree of balance being far too strict. Now, you do have way more talents that you can sort of move around on whether or not you want to take. Despite this one being the generic single target build for Balanced Druid, you have been seeing on the PTR many, in fact most of the results have now switched over to the wild mushrooms, the automatic, the Sunseeker mushroom version, as well as more after the buff attempts to play with Touch of the Cosmos as well. You have some slightly better options in terms of damage profile. For example, Cosmic Rapidity losing a bit more value in AoE if you're not playing around with Stellar Flare. You can, for example, drop these two talents to go somewhere else. The talents themselves do give you more options. You do have still a very fluid damage profile. It's arguably possibly the best feature you have. Like, for example, you could be going both for single target and AoE in a fight like Rick Reverb with a bunch of ad spawns. Guess where the ad spawns are, right? Or you could just go full on AoE. Don't bother, even in the very same fight with the very same ad spawns, just don't bother with your single target focus and instead just go full AoE with Starfall. Of course, when you go back to a single target fight, you can go back to just using Star Surge, still of course going back to using something like Stellar Flare for single target. You are very flexible. It's one of the weaknesses of some specs that have suffered from this, either right now or from the past. Specs like Marksmanship, specs like Destro, specs like Retribution Paladin had this problem where they had to swap 4 to 5, maybe even 6 talents if they wanted to do full AoE or if they wanted to do full single target. For Balanced Druid, it's not nearly as bad of a case. They can still output very good single target and very good AoE damage within the same builds, perhaps moving around 1 or 2 talents at best. That remains one of their powers, one of their strong points right now in their talenting, which is good because we have looked at the bosses not completely in depth, but we have been looking at different bosses, and right now there seems to be, at least in the 7 tested bosses out of 8, practically very few windows, very few rooms of pure 100% unfiltered single target. Pretty much every boss seems to be having some random cleave of 2 targets, 5 targets, maybe even 8 or 10 massive AoE situations. So this can give more value, of course, to specs that are able to do damage to more targets. Of course, you will still have your raid comp where you will be designating some of the better single target specs to just funnel on single target and not do nearly as much AoE damage, and then have some others focus on full out AoE, and then maybe others focus on doing a bit half and half depending on how you are spreading the cooldowns of your comp, for example. But it's good for Balanced Druid to be able to have the option to do both at pretty good effectiveness. Now, their new tier set compared to what they are losing, what you have right now in Season 1, which did nothing other than giving you flat damage to your spenders as well as a bit more astral power generation, particularly to Rat, since it's what you're going to be casting the most in single target fights. The new tier set is changing something about the build, or rather encouraging more to play with Wild Mushroom, because your 2-piece gives you already the chance to spawn the Wild Mushroom, which is, it's fine for the damage increase. It's even better because the 4-piece of balance makes you do 20% more damage with Starfall and Star Surge if the target has the Wild Mushroom dot on them. So considering the Wild Mushroom from the tier set procs about twice per minute, 2.5 hasted times per minute, it's about a 25-ish second uptime of this. If you go and talent into Mushroom yourself, you're gonna be having almost like a 50 seconds uptime every minute, so like a 90-ish% uptime of this buff, which will give you a 90% uptime of doing 20% more damage with your spenders, because the enemy will have the mushroom dot on them. So that's pretty much the only extra brought by the tier set. Way more value of talenting into the mushroom yourself because of the dot left behind, synergizing with the tier set itself. But besides that, between the current very good damage and good damage profile you have, plus the rework of the General 3 we talked about already, giving you way better options, especially your entire defensive line now being much easier to path through without having to go through useless talents, for example, has given you some pretty good results. Some pretty good and encouraging results so far, getting close to Season 2. After them, we have the number 1, Shadow Priest. Now, let's immediately start with the disclaimer. Some, not all, but some of these logs are corrupted. And by corrupted, we mean they were bugged by the Power Infusion bug that existed. Basically, you had Power Infusion lasting basically twice as much as what it was supposed to last if you were hard casting PI on another player. So if you were hard casting this, let's say this priest was hard casting this on this shaman, the duration was far longer than it was supposed to be. Meanwhile, if you very simply casted it on yourself or let it smart target by default, then it would work as normal. It would work as expected. So some of these results are benefiting from a, slightly higher uptime of PI, slightly higher, much higher uptime of PI than you're supposed to. However, even with that in mind, Shadow Priest has been doing very well. Despite, as you can see, Discipline receiving tons of changes, Holy Priest receiving an even larger tonnage of changes, and Shadow Priest receiving none. Literally no actual changes other than bug fixes are coming in 11.1, not even to their, hero talents. Nothing at all whatsoever. So obviously not even a point going from live to 11.1 because nothing in your talents is changing. You are, let's just say, far more, you already were locked into Archon, but now you are even more locked into Archon because of this. Your Power Infusion effect grants you an additional 10% haste. So of course, having a tier set which says that you have a chance to randomly shoot out a Void Bolt at 200% effectiveness, and then also this is guaranteed when you use your cooldown, but more importantly, 4-piece, when you do hit this jackpot, you gain 5 seconds of PI. And also, Mind Blast and Void Bolt are doing 15% more damage when you have PI. So this not only locks you even more into playing Archon for the value of PI, it also locks you even more into playing Void Eruption, because Void Eruption turns, meaning that you can benefit from this buff, whereas if you were playing with Dark Ascension, you would not have been. However, with that being said, it is a very good flow of your rotation now. Because of the amount of PI buffs you can get, you cast it at 0.5, it's gonna last 25 seconds instead of 15. That's the 5-second guaranteed proc that you have because you cast your cooldown. Casting your cooldown always gives you jackpot, which always gives you 5 seconds of PI. So by default, your PI now is 20 seconds long, right? So you cast PI, it's supposed to last up to 25, it goes up to 30, and then you have all of the mini little procs sometimes that happen here and there, which feels good because, getting haste feels good. Casting faster always feels good. That's pretty much everything that's happening to Shadow Priest. They are just doing better because it also fits well with their rotation. They have, of course, playing Archon, you have very good, stable 1 minute window of damage, right? So being able to fit these random procs when your cooldown is only at a 1 minute gap is pretty good. Like for example here, you get your Halo cast on pull, so Halo is back 1 minute into the fight, and then 1 minute into the fight you proc PI again. So you can have your second damage window 1 minute in with your Halo going off while also having PI, which feels very good. It's easy for you as a Shadow Priest because of your cooldowns being so short on a 1 minute cooldown with Halo, and then every couple of minutes you also have Void Eruption, and also the fact that you have the stackability, we can say, the stackability of Surge of Insanity. So you can stack it up to 4 times. On top of that, because you play Archon, you have Halo giving you Surge of Insanity, and then it gives you way more damage when you consume Surge of Insanity, and then you also have Surge of Insanity giving you even more shadowy apparitions. So you can wait. You're not forced to use this. You can just wait, for example, for your PI to proc from your tier set. You can wait to stockpile them into the 1 minute windows of Halo and, RNG a little bit, hoping for one of the PI from your tier set to proc, and then dump all of these in with faster casting, as well as, of course, since you are in Halo, the extra damage you get when you are inside of Halo. So it is a tier set that even past the breakness that it had up until a few days ago. Now it's been fixed, but some of these results, if they were older than a few days ago, they are still bugged. Even accounting for these bugs, you are doing very, very well right now. So it is also a positive outlook at the moment for Shadow Priest, even accounting for some damage increase coming from the bug of Power Infusion. Perhaps if we had to look at one of the more dangerous situations for Shadow Priest, especially in the focus of Mythic Plus, is that Discipline Priest is also looking very good. So of course there is always a danger that whenever a Discipline, in this case, whenever Discipline becomes powerful, any other priest is out of the question for becoming meta. So that could be one of the issues for Shadow, more so than currently at least their damage right now. Last of the specs we kept is Destruction, because Destruction is doing very well. Destruction is also one of the specs that was most played in Mythic Plus, as well in high keys. Second disclaimer after the disclaimer of Shadow Priest. Destruction was also bugged, and actually, unlike Shadow Priest, Destruction is currently still bugged. However, don't despair. I'm not about to say that it's bugged to the point where this number actually should be closer to here, not really. So what's the bugging happening? Well, the first bugging, which was actually not actually fixed, it was just changed. The tier set itself was changed to account for the bug, but the bug is still there. So basically now Blizzard is saying the bug is a feature. The bug was that this was hasted, this was scaling and giving you extra hits of these Demon Fire Bolt hits, which have now been nerfed down to being 6 Demon Fire Bolts being cast instead of 12. So they just cut the base bolts you get from the tier set from 12 to 6 to account for this bug. Now the second bug is something that wasn't even supposed to happen, because most of these changes are whatever. 3 seconds extra Havoc is fine. Mayhem, also the alternative, also being buffed, of course. Diabolic Embers being moved to row 10. So now Diabolic Embers, instead of being in the middle, in between Dimension Ripper and Ruin, now it's all the way here, because Dimension Ripper has been cooked into Dimensional Rift as a choice node and has been changed to be made easier. That was the entire point of Blizzard saying, imagine hearing this in the Year of the Lord 2025. Blizzard is saying Destro was too hard. So, in Undermined, we are adding passive versions of Dimensional Rift and Channel Demon Fire, as well as giving Rain of Fire the Earthquake treatment, allowing you to cast it on an enemy rather than on a reticle. Now, we are used very often to have these, passive abilities that work in the background to be an option, of course, to make the playstyle more simple and more chill, but don't expect them to be competitive. Usually, those are always a bit weaker, because they are simpler to play. Of course, they simplify your rotation, but they also make it slightly less performing. Unfortunately, right now, this isn't happening with Demon Fire Infusion. So the change is that now, instead of having Channel Demon Fire as your only option, just like you only have the option of Dimensional Rift, now you have the option to have the automatic Dimensional Rift proccing, and also the option to have your periodic damage fire a bolt, as well as Incinerate, having a 25% chance to fire a Demon Fire Bolt. It's not firing the entire ability, it's not firing all of the bolts, just one of them. Now, this random proc also works, of course, with the follow-up talents for the damage increase and the procs, etc., the extension of Immolate, etc. However, the current bug is that the Hellcaller version of Destro replaces Immolate with Wither. And what's the problem? The problem is that right now, Wither is not following the 4% chance to proc of Immolate. It's following the 25% chance to proc of Incinerate. So now, Wither has a vastly higher proc chance of these Demon Fire Bolts than you would supposedly have normally. So at the moment, especially, or rather only if you play with Hellcaller, you are playing with Demon Fire Infusion to make use of this buff. That's why I said it's not that all of these good results for Destro are all bugged. So if, for example, if you are playing with Diabolist, of course you're not benefiting from the Wither double stacking, etc. So it doesn't really matter if you are playing Hellcaller, but you're not playing with this, you're playing with Channel Demon Fire normally, you're also not benefiting from this buff. And these were at least most of the logs. You had hard casted Channel Demon Fires, or you were playing very simply Diabolist without playing Hellcaller, rather than playing the Demon Fire Infusion version. So even with the bug giving you more damage at the moment, it's not that it's being used by every lock that has been getting these good results in the PTR. However, with that being said, as mentioned here, once again, most of the changes here are not really doing anything to your talent trees, to your rotation. What is actually doing something to all of that is your tier set. Because the 2-piece set bonus is the big one here, not even the 4-piece. Your spells and abilities have a chance to give you jackpot, and when it does, you spawn the flurry of 6 demon fireballs at twice the effectiveness, and then Infernal guarantees this effect. The 4-piece is less important. It's good damage, but it's not important to the power of Demon Firebolt. Is that now Jackpot increases your mastery and your spells gain maximum benefit from your mastery for 10 seconds, which is like a 10%, almost 12% damage increase if you have 15 something thousand mastery. That's perhaps one of the other main changes, that as we are getting closer to Season 2, it already had gotten better, but now in Season 2 it will be even better, which is the value of mastery. Now haste is still your de facto very good secondary stat, but now mastery has a lot of value because of this tier set. So beyond just the damage of the tier set itself, this is only this 8.6% damage, it's just the 2-piece. On top of this, you also have the 4-piece proc, also giving you a pretty good damage buff for 10 seconds. So now, much like we have seen for the other builds, the tier set is sort of pushing you towards certain talents, because now, of course, since your tier set procs Demon Fire Bolts and these benefit from these talents, you are pretty much encouraged to go down this side of the tree and take these talents. Now, something we mentioned about the damage profile, the fact that there aren't that many single target fights. In fact, so far there was just one really out of 7. It is very good for Destro, because Destro, while not being insane in single target, does have tools to become very good down to sometimes, possibly, and we have seen this in the past multiple times, out of control when it comes to AoE. Either flat out very large AoE or smaller AoE, you might even say cleave on a couple or 3 targets, for example. That's where Destro can do very well. So having many fights where you don't just have one target to hit, but either you have multiple, many, for Wither, for example, to stack and spread, or in some cases even your Rain of Fire to do damage, or going down to fights where they are, for example, 2 targets. There are 2 or 3 adds spawning, and you can gain value from things like Chaos Bolt, being spread, of course, by Havoc. You can also get even more value with things like Shadowburn, because Shadowburn has been gaining more and more value over time for Destro, now down to being one of the better abilities, which becomes, of course, much better if there are more targets. Why? Have you missed a patch which made Shadowburn an AoE ability? No, it's good because Shadowburn, as you might not have known, has a very high increased critical strike chance. On top of that, 50% more critical strike chance if the target is in execute range, and then its cooldown is also reduced by 5 seconds if the target is in execute range. So of course, if you're fighting a boss, a single target boss, you only have to wait for that boss to go in execute range. However, if you're fighting a boss with multiple targets, many of them going down to, of course, execute range HP very often, you can get way more value out of your Shadowburn, way more damage out of your Shadowburn because of it. So that is also a very good tool that Destro is being able to use in the raid, because of the lack of pure single target fights, which does in general benefit the overall damage of Destruction Warlock. So again, another spec which is not receiving that many balance tuning changes in terms of talents being moved around, for example, etc, but even just the tier set itself is quite good enough to make you have pretty good results right now in the PTR. We have seen both the results in the raid being very good, and as well as the results in Mythic Plus also being quite good in the popularity of Destro in the high keys being tested so far. So going through these 4 specs right now, because of their current very good state in the results. Of course, if you had to combine these results from the raid together with the ones in Mythic Plus, then overall, perhaps the best would be Balance next to Shadow, and then Destro, and then later on Devastation, mostly because of their lower down priority level in Mythic Plus compared to the raid. But these were the 4 specs that was worth going over because of their, good performance right now, and because they're not that talked about, they're not that much under the spotlight at the moment, yet their performance has been quite good. So it was worth going over and highlighting their current good performances to see if this will carry on, of course, by the time Season 2 releases. So with this out of the way on this Tuesday, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting, of course, the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, fantastic. I just was wondering if I had to go out before making a video or after. I opted for after, and it stopped raining. All planned.